In the heart of a land nestled between the veiled mountains and the forest of echoes lay Virilia, a kingdom unlike any other. Its rivers shimmered not with sunlight, but with threads of soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the trees whispered ancient names to those who listened. Virilia had known centuries of bloodshed, border disputes and broken treaties, but amidst all the chaos, one thing remained unbroken: the crown of Virilia. Forged not by human hands but born of ancestral magic, the crown was a living artifact, a vine of silver and emerald that chose its bearer. No ruler could simply place it on their head, it had to accept them. Those it rejected were left with cuts that never healed, their ambitions seared into their skin like shame. But those it embraced? They ruled not just with authority but with the very breath of Virilia's spirit running through them. Princess Kayla was born during the first quiet snowfall after a 30-year war. The moment her first cry echoed in the royal chambers, the winds that battered the kingdom's edges stilled. In the temple, the vines of the living crown stirred, they bloomed, though it was the dead of winter. The priestesses whispered one word: peace. From that day forward, all of Virilia knew her name. Kayla, the child of prophecy, the stormbreaker. She grew with grace and poise, trained not just in swordplay and governance, but in the ancient rituals of harmony, the delicate arts of listening to the land, and the language of the ancestral spirits that watched over Virilia. Her eyes, the color of deep-rooted moss after rain, seemed to see more than just the world, they saw intent. And with each passing year, it became clearer to the people that she was indeed meant for the crown. But power, even when destined, never comes without challenge. In the shadows of the court lingered a man whose blood was as royal as hers, though his claim twisted through generations like a weed in sacred soil. Lord Mayron, son of a forgotten prince, bore himself like a king. Tall, with hair dark as ravens and a gaze that could cut through steel, he commanded attention the moment he stepped into a room. Where Kayla was quiet strength, Mayron was thunder. And he believed the storm was his to summon. He watched Kayla grow with a mixture of admiration and resentment. He could not deny her wisdom, nor her uncanny connection to the land. But he saw her compassion as weakness, her listening as hesitation. Virilia, in his eyes, needed a ruler with an iron will, not one who bent her ear to the whispers of the wind. Whispers, those were the true currency of court life. And Mayron dealt in them expertly. In the royal court, carved from crystal that reflected the light of truth, Mayron began sowing seeds of doubt. Soft words, never direct, always questions. Is she truly ready? She speaks to the forest, not the generals. Will the crown choose a girl who trembles at the sight of blood? The nobles, weary from war yet addicted to its rhythm, began to murmur. They had seen rulers fall from grace before. They had seen crowns reject. Kayla, though aware of the tensions, held her silence. Not out of fear but out of resolve. The crown would choose. Not the court. Not the bloodlines. Not Mayron. The ceremony approached, the binding. It was a day of reckoning when the crown would awaken, examine the soul of the heir, and either root itself upon their head or recoil, leaving a wreath of wounds. Kayla had trained her entire life for this moment, not to prove herself, but to honor the legacy she carried. But Mayron was not idle. He knew the rituals, the sacred paths to the crown's chamber, the offerings it required. He had studied the ancient scrolls, learned of old failings, and sought those who once tried and failed to manipulate the crown. His plan was bold. If he could steal the crown before the ceremony and bind it to himself by force, then Kayla would be seen as unworthy, a rejected heir. His rule would be law, perhaps not by spirit but by fear. The night before the binding, Kayla stood by the mirror lake, its surface like liquid obsidian. She whispered to the waters, seeking clarity. The reflections shimmered, not with her own image but with visions of the past. Queens in armor, kings with tears in their eyes, flames, thorns and a crown bathed in blood. She saw Mayron's eyes, burning with ambition. And she saw her own face, not with fear but with resolve, bathed in silver light. At that moment she knew what would come. And still she did not flee. In the hours before dawn, Mayron struck. Cloaked and silent, he entered the sacred chamber beneath the palace, a place only the chosen could step foot. He held in his hand an ancient blade said to sever magical bonds, stolen from a temple long forgotten. Before him, on a pedestal of living stone, rested the crown. Its tendrils twitched, sensing his approach. He spoke not to it but commanded, "You will obey me." He reached for it. The vines wrapped around his wrist like lightning. But he pressed on, forcing the blade between himself and the crown, cutting the connection between spirit and choice. The crown screamed, not in sound but in the mind. All of Virilia stirred. The trees rustled though there was no wind. The stars blinked out for a moment. And the crown latched onto him. For a moment, it seemed he had succeeded. He emerged at dawn, the crown upon his head. But it had changed. Where once it glowed with silver and emerald, now it bled. Tiny thorns burst from its base, piercing his scalp, drawing blood that dripped like tears down his face. He smiled, triumphant, but the crowd did not cheer. The priest did not bow. Kayla stepped forward. Not in fury but in sorrow. "You have taken what was not yours," she said. "The crown does not forget." Meron laughed. "The crown is mine now. You are nothing but prophecy. I am reality." But his hand trembled. The vines around the crown moved, coiling tighter. The thorns deepened. Blood pooled at his temples. Still he stood his ground. Kayla turned to the gathered court. "The crown may rest upon his head, but it has not chosen him. And all of Virilia bears witness." The air turned cold. The crown hissed. Meron's eyes widened as he realized he could not remove it. He fell to his knees, not in submission but in agony. The crown, bound by ancient will, did not accept what was stolen. It resisted. It punished. It grew thorns not to protect but to reject. Kayla stepped toward him. She did not raise a sword. She simply spoke. "You may hold the crown, Meron. But it will never be yours." The court was silent, watching blood drip from the so-called king's brow. The crown pulsed once, a final warning. Kayla turned and walked away. And the trees, as if in approval, rustled her name. The great hall of Virilia pulsed with the hush of reverence. Above, the crystal dome reflected a sky swirled with golden light and drifting clouds. Nature itself seemed to hold its breath. The palace walls, etched with ancestral runes, glowed faintly as if the spirits within them had stirred in anticipation. Kayla stood tall on the altar, the living vines of the crown of Virilia resting gently upon her head. Its silver tendrils had curled delicately around her temples, embracing her like anointed kin. The court bowed in silence, waiting for the final rite. The air shimmered with magic. Kayla's eyes closed. Her breath was steady, her heart aligned with the ancient rhythm of the land. In that sacred moment she felt the weight of her ancestors, the lives lost in war, and the peace that longed to bloom in the kingdom's soil. She opened her mouth to speak the oath of unity, but the words never came. The silence shattered. A scream rang out. Then the clang of metal on stone. Chaos ignited like wildfire. The main gates burst open with a thunderous boom. Dozens of soldiers in blackened armor, not wearing the crest of Virilia, but a new insignia scorched into their breastplates, stormed in, blades drawn. The crowd panicked, scattering like leaves in a gale. Blood spattered the marble floor as guards loyal to Kayla were cut down in the first wave. Priestesses shielding the altar were thrown aside, their chants silenced mid-word. At the head of it all stood Meron, his cloak torn, his face smeared with soot and rage. His eyes locked onto Kayla like a predator who had stalked long enough and now made his lunge. "Seize her," he roared. Kayla's protectors rushed forward, but they were few. She had never believed in surrounding herself with walls of men. Her strength had always been the people, the land, the truth. But truth is a blade that cuts slowly in the face of betrayal. Meron's soldiers climbed the steps of the altar. Kayla stood her ground. She did not draw a weapon. Instead, she placed one hand over the crown, her other clenched at her heart. She met Meron's eyes without flinching. "You dishonor every root of this kingdom," she said, her voice steady even as chaos consumed the hall. "You bring fire to a house made of hope." But her words were swallowed by violence. A soldier struck her across the face with the back of a gauntlet hand. Blood ran down her cheek. The crown shivered. Another man grabbed her by the arm, dragging her down the steps. Her gown tore. The ceremonial thread woven with peace sigils unraveled under force. The crown, still pulsing with light, clung to her head until a second blow knocked her to her knees. Meron approached. His face was not triumphant, it was wild, desperate. A man who had clawed his way through prophecy and rejection and finally reached the edge of the prize he had always believed was his. He stared down at Kayla, now on the ground, her lips bloodied, her face smeared with dust. But her eyes still glowed, calm, defiant. "You don't deserve it," he spat. "You never did." He reached down and ripped the crown from her head. The vines resisted. A strand snapped and recoiled like a snake, slicing his hand. But Meron ignored the blood. He staggered back, lifting the crown high for all to see. In the broken hall, lit only by fire and fear, he placed the living crown upon his own head. For a breathless moment the room froze. The vines twitched. They did not settle. The silver turned darker, tinged with crimson. The tendrils writhed like they were trying to escape. Mehran gritted his teeth and forced it down onto his scalp. The crown clamped. Thorns sprouted, dozens then hundreds, piercing skin digging into flesh. His mouth opened in a silent scream. But he did not stop. He raised his hands dripping blood and shouted, "I am king. The true ruler of Virilia." Lightning cracked outside. The crystal dome trembled. The runes on the walls dimmed as if the ancestors themselves recoiled. Kayla, still on her knees, watched as Mehran staggered under the weight of the crown. Every step he took down the altar sent tremors through the floor. The crown was rejecting him, not with a single act but with slow, torturous certainty. He turned to the court, now held at blade point by his forces. "Kneel," he commanded. Some, terrified, did. Others simply lowered their heads, too afraid to look up. But the priestess Alithia, bloodied but alive, rose from the far side of the room and shouted, "The crown may rest upon your head, traitor, but it will never sit upon your soul." Mehran spun, flinging blood from his fingers. "Silence her." But the damage had been done. Whispers rose from the corners of the hall. "Why does the crown bleed? It's alive, and it hates him. It should not do that." Mehran's hand trembled. He touched the base of the crown. The vines twitched, drawing more blood. His vision blurred, not from pain alone but from something deeper, a sickness settling into his bones. The magic of the crown, sacred and ancient, was punishing him from within. Still he would not yield. He turned to Kayla. "Take her to the dungeons," he ordered. Soldiers dragged her by the arms. But her gaze never left him. In her eyes Mehran saw not hatred, not even anger, but the inevitability of consequence. The throne was dragged from its dais and Mehran seated himself upon it, still bleeding, still gritting his teeth. A scribe was forced to declare him ruler, though his voice broke midway. The court watched in horror as blood dripped from Mehran's ears and down his neck, staining the throne with crimson. In the corridors below, Kayla was thrown into a stone cell, the walls damp and thick with silence. Her ceremonial dress, torn and heavy with blood, clung to her like memory. She touched the small wound on her forehead where the crown had last rested. Her fingers came away glowing faintly. The crown had not left her. Not truly. It had been forced away. Ripped, yes. But she had felt it resist. It had bled with her. It was alive, and wounded. And wounds remember. Above, Mehran sat on the throne, surrounded by fire and shadows. His knights celebrated. Wine was spilled. The bells of the city rang, though their tones were hollow. Citizens watched from windows, unsure if the end of one era meant the beginning of another, or simply more blood. But Mehran could not sleep. Every night the crown pulsed tighter. It whispered. He heard voices in dreams, ancestors screaming, forests burning, rivers rising. And always Kayla's voice, not shouting, not crying, but praying. He tried to remove it once. His hands blistered. He ordered a blacksmith to cut it off. The blacksmith died within minutes of touching it. He summoned mages, witches, seers. They recoiled. One went blind. The crown would not be taken, nor would it serve. And so Mehran ruled, if ruling meant sitting upon a throne that bled with him. If ruling meant silencing protest with executions. If ruling meant sleep came only with potions and even those offered no peace. He was king, yes. But the land grew restless. Storms lingered longer. The trees bent away from his soldiers. The crops refused to yield. And deep beneath the palace in a cold cell, Kayla whispered to the roots through stone and silence. The spirits came. The earth listened. And the vines stirred again. Not in surrender, but in preparation. At first it was a trickle. Just a few drops of blood on Mehran's pillow when he rose from a restless sleep. No cuts on his skin, no blade nearby. Just blood. Dark, slow, and oddly warm as if it had only just left a beating heart. He dismissed it. A nosebleed perhaps. The dry air. The nerves of a new king. But the second night the blood pooled at his temples. This time, it left a stain that would not wash out. When he ran his hands through his hair, red streaked his fingers, though there were no wounds. Not a scratch. The third night the whispers began. Soft at first. A sound behind the wall. A flicker of breath behind the drapes. A voice that called his name, but never from the same direction twice. In the silence of his chambers, he would turn sharply, heart hammering, only to find no one there. Servants who approached him began to flinch when he passed, their eyes darting not at him but to the crown. The crown of Virilia. It no longer gleamed. The silver had dulled to a charcoal sheen, and the smooth vines had turned rough, textured like bark. Thorns began to sprout, not gradually but all at once, as if the crown had grown angry in the night. When Mayron awoke one morning and looked into the polished obsidian mirror, he found one of the thorns had pierced his scalp, blood was crusted around it, and yet he had felt nothing while sleeping. He sent for his healers. They found nothing wrong with him. No fever. No lesions. His heart was strong, his blood normal. And yet, when they left, he found another cut on his side, just below his ribs, like the thin slice of a ritual blade. As if something had opened him while he breathed. By the seventh night the visions began. He was no longer sure what was real. In the dark he saw flashes of forests burning, trees screaming in silence as ash covered the ground. His throne room would fill with fog that wasn't there. His own reflection would shift, and sometimes it was Kayla he saw in the mirror staring back at him with eyes that glowed. One night, he woke gasping and found the floor covered in black vines, crawling toward his bed, vanishing the moment light struck them. He told no one. Not yet. But the people noticed. In the city below, rumors whispered like wildfire. Children spoke of dreams where the castle cried at night. Bakers found their dough bleeding. The palace bells rang on their own, 3 sharp clangs always just before midnight. Farmers swore the wheat bent not toward the sun, but away from the castle's spires. And always the birds, once common in the skies, circled but never landed. Inside the palace the staff began to disappear. A maid named Elria was last seen lighting candles in the royal hallway. Only her shoes were found the next day, filled with water, though there had been no rain. A cook claimed he heard singing from inside the walls, a lullaby in a voice that belonged to the late Queen Sarian, dead 10 years. He vanished before sunrise and his knives were found embedded into the kitchen ceiling, spelling out a name, Kayla. Mayron's advisors urged him to dismiss these stories. Superstition, they called it. Rebellious whispers. But he saw the fear in their eyes. Even they would not look directly at the crown anymore. And the crown had become a creature of its own. It pulsed. Not visibly, but Mayron could feel it. A heartbeat not aligned with his own. A rhythm that throbbed behind his eyes, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, like a second consciousness tethered to his skull. When he tried to remove it, the pain was unbearable. The first time his hands shook for an hour afterward. The second time he bled from his ears. The third time he collapsed and awoke to find 3 new thorns had sprouted, one pressed deep into the soft skin above his neck. He knew then. The crown was feeding on him. And something else, something ancient and watchful, was awakening within it. It wasn't just the people who were uneasy. The castle itself had changed. Tapestries frayed overnight. Mirrors cracked without being touched. The great chandelier in the hall began to drip wax that smelled of iron. Rooms became colder even in the heart of summer. And Mayron, the self-declared king, began to wither. He walked with a stoop now barely noticeable, but it was there. His eyes were rimmed with purple shadows. His voice cracked when he barked orders. When he touched iron, his fingers blistered. And when he slept, if he could sleep, he dreamed of vines growing inside his mouth, forcing his jaws apart, growing through his ribs, wrapping around his heart until it no longer beat. And still he did not remove the crown. Because he knew. If he did, he wouldn't survive the night. The next section, bro. The forest of Arrenwood was older than the kingdom itself. Its trees stretched toward the sky like silent sentinels, their trunks twisted by time and wind. Deep within its heart, veiled by mist and moss, Princess Kayla drew breath for the first time since the blood-drenched altar. Her coronation gown was torn, soaked in sweat and soil, but her spirit, though shaken, had not broken. The loyalists who had dragged her from the chaos at the throne room were few, but determined. Among them was Ser Elander, her childhood sword master, who carried her like a child as she slipped in and out of consciousness during their flight. Mayron's men scoured the roads and villages, but none dared enter Arrenwood. The forest was sacred. And feared. They hid her in a grove surrounded by whispering willows. The days were quiet, marked only by the chirping of unseen birds and the rustle of leaves. But Kayla's nights were full of dreams, not nightmares but visions. Sometimes she floated above Virilia, watching as black smoke curled from its towers. Other times she stood at the edge of a great chasm, and across from her stood Mayron, crowned but bleeding, unable to cross. The forest was watching her. And then the forest spoke. It began with the wind, soft at first like a mother humming. Then came the flickers of movement, not beasts, not men, but shadows and shapes she couldn't name. Ser Elander grew uneasy. The other loyalists whispered prayers. But Kayla stepped deeper into the woods alone. She felt drawn by something older than fear. The deeper she walked, the more the forest changed. Trees leaned toward her, vines untangled at her feet. Eventually, the path disappeared altogether, and the light dimmed until there was only shadow. That's when they came, the forest spirits. They did not speak with mouths. Their forms shimmered, neither male nor female, clothed in bark and smoke. Their eyes were white-hot, glowing like the last embers of a sacred fire. One by one they circled Kayla, whispering into her soul. They showed her a memory, her own face at the altar, blood on her lip, her fingers reaching for the crown. Then Mayron, eyes wild, pushing her aside. Then the crown itself, falling, resisting, twisting. She reached out and the vision shifted. Now she saw Mayron in the palace. The thorned crown on his head, his face drawn in agony. Shadows wrapped around him like leeches. But what caught her breath was the thread, a single beam of golden light stretching from the crown to her chest. It pulsed, still connected, still bound. The spirits surrounded her more closely now. Their voices vibrated through her ribs. He wears it, but it is not his. He rules, but the roots reject him. He bleeds, because you still breathe. Kayla fell to her knees, tears sliding down her dirt-streaked face. Then why don't you stop him? She cried. Why not take the crown back? A long silence. Then came the final trial. The spirits shaped themselves into memories, visions of her father's rule, marked by bitterness and bloodshed. They showed her mother, silent and regal, covering bruises with silk. They showed the war, a time when the line between mercy and madness blurred. And they showed Kayla's own eyes, once innocent, looking upon traitors and whispering that they deserved death. Will you rule like them? The spirits asked. Or will you break the pattern? She stood slowly. I will not be a mirror. I will be a fire that purifies. The forest stirred. The spirits vanished into mist, and the grove erupted in golden light. Vines wove around her wrists but did not bind. They pulsed like blood, warm and gentle. Leaves fell like feathers, and in her palm she felt a sharp sting. A thorn. It had appeared suddenly, small, glowing and pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She clutched it, and through it she could feel the pain radiating from the crown miles away. It was rejecting Mayron. It had never accepted him. But it had been dormant, confused, waiting for a sign. Now that she had been tested and accepted, the bond had reawakened. Kayla emerged from the trial changed. Her posture was straighter. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. When her loyalists saw her, they fell to their knees not because she demanded it, but because something old and sacred now walked in her shadow. She said nothing of the spirits. But that night, she sat by the fire and whispered to the thorn in her palm. It pulsed in reply. She felt Mayron's growing torment, the way the crown's thorns dug deeper with every lie he told, with every selfish decree he gave. The forest had not simply hidden her. It had claimed her. She was not just the rightful queen. She was the vessel through which Virilia would either heal or burn. And soon, very soon she would return. Wumpro. Blood soaked through the linen again. Lord Mayron bit down on his lip to suppress a scream as the attendants recoiled. Their faces betrayed what their lips dared not say. The crown was killing him slowly and they all knew it. In the once great throne room of Virilia, where incense and flower petals had once filled the air on the day of Kayla's interrupted coronation, now there lingered only the sour stench of old blood, burnt herbs and rot. The golden banners of the royal house still hung from the pillars, but their threads were frayed and faded, as though the palace itself rejected the man who now claimed dominion from its heart. Mayron sat slouched on the high seat, his hands tightly bound in thick cloth strips that had turned crimson again just moments after being changed. His fingers trembled as he reached for his goblet, failing to lift it. The chalice clattered to the floor with a dull thud, spilling blackened wine that crept across the marble like a shadow taking shape. The crown sat beside him on a velvet cushion. Not atop his head. Not anymore. Its thorns had multiplied. Where once it was a radiant circlet of gold, smooth and seamless, it had become something wild, pulsing, twisted, alive. The courtiers dared not look at it too long. They whispered behind their sleeves that it breathed. Summon Lord Varen, Mayron snarled through cracked lips. Now. Varen was the last hope Mayron had not yet burned. A man once outlawed for his dabbling in forbidden arts, Varen now walked freely through the palace halls under Mayron's protection. He arrived in a dark robe, stitched with ash-colored runes that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. The guards backed away from him. You called Majesty? Varen asked, bowing low, though his tone mocked the title. Mehran bared his teeth. I cannot wear it, he said, voice hoarse. It bites. It grows. Every time I try, it pierces deeper. My hands. He broke off, holding them up. The wrappings were soaked again, little beads of crimson sliding from his fingertips to the floor. The pain is worse than ever. The whispers don't stop. Even in sleep I see her face. Kayla. Varen raised a brow. You should not speak her name. I must sever the bond, Mehran hissed. Cut her from the crown. Rip her from its soul. Can it be done? Varen circled the throne like a vulture. You asked to break an ancestral bond crafted by the founding flame, he said. Do you know what that costs? Name it. Your blood. Your name. Perhaps your soul. Take it. A silence followed, long and cold. Varen studied him with the eyes of a man looking at something already half dead. Very well. But there will be no going back. That night, Mehran was taken to the crypts beneath the palace, a forbidden place, sealed since the days of the Crown Wars. The steps spiraled down into cold earth, where ancient relics lay forgotten under dust and ash. At the center of the crypt stood a stone altar, scorched black from some forgotten fire. Here, Varen drew the sigils in a circle with bone dust and blood. He lit candles made from tallow that reeked of decay. He chanted in a tongue lost before Virilia's founding. And at the center, Mehran knelt, the crown before him, his hands unwrapped for the first time in weeks. They were no longer hands. The skin was torn and gnarled, the fingers swollen and black at the tips. Thorn marks crisscrossed them like cursed veins. From each knuckle, tiny gold needles had emerged, sprouting like fungal growths. He trembled not from pain but rage. Begin, he commanded. Varen did. The ritual was long and the crypt pulsed with dark power. Shadows twisted on the walls, and the crown lifted from the stone as if drawn by unseen strings. Mehran screamed as flames licked at his hands, invisible to all but him, and the voice of the crown filled the chamber. She lives. She reigns. She remembers. Asterisk asterisk. The crown pulsed with golden light. Varen's chants grew faster. She lives. She reigns. She remembers. Asterisk asterisk. Mehran shrieked. Cut her out. Cut her out of it. But the crown responded with fury. Thorns extended, lashing in every direction. One struck Varen across the face, slicing open his cheek. Blood hit the runes and they ignited. Then came the vision. In a blinding flash, Mehran saw Kayla, not dead, not defeated, but walking through fire. The forest burned around her but she remained untouched. A crown of flame hovered above her brow, and she looked directly at him with eyes of molten gold. You stole. Now you bleed. Asterisk asterisk. He collapsed. When he woke hours later, the crypt was silent. Varen lay unconscious, his hair singed, his robes scorched. The crown sat beside him again. Unchanged. Mehran's hands were worse, cracked open, bleeding fresh, but now the pain radiated up his arms into his chest, as if vines were growing through his veins. The attempt had failed. He screamed in fury and staggered back up the steps, alone. The days that followed were worse than before. The nobles noticed. Lord Severin, once Mehran's closest ally, began asking questions in council. Why does the king hide his hands? He asked. Why does he not wear the crown he claims by right? Mehran snarled but gave no answer. The people noticed too. Rumors spread in the markets of strange lights in the forest. Some swore they saw Kayla's silhouette on the wind, her hair a banner of flame. Others claimed the spirits had returned, whispering Kayla's name in the night. A servant disappeared from the palace. Then another. Then a guard. Whispers said they had defected, gone to seek the true queen in the woods. Mehran ordered executions. It did not stop the bleeding. Desperate, he tried again. He burned Kayla's childhood paintings. He drowned her old letters in oil. He razed the chapel where she had once trained in royal rites. But nothing severed the bond. The crown remained wild. And every night, in his sleep, he dreamed of thorns winding around his throat. Of Kayla's voice whispering not with anger, but sorrow. You were not meant to rule. You were meant to fall. Asterisk asterisk. He awoke screaming. He ordered the mirror in his chambers destroyed when he saw his reflection, and it spoke back in Kayla's voice. Even the court's high priests, cowed though they were, refused to bless his reign again. The crown rejects you, the oldest one dared say. You cannot force what must be chosen. Mehran killed him on the spot. By now his court was half empty. Nobles had begun to flee. The border lords refused to send tribute. Virilia was fracturing again, but not because of war. Because of rot. One night, standing before the throne, Mehron lifted the crown once more. His hands shook violently. Blood dripped onto the floor and the crown hissed as it touched his skin. He placed it atop his head and screamed. The thorns did not merely prick him this time. They pierced bone. They rooted. He dropped to his knees, clawing at it. No. I am king. I am unworthy. The crown pulsed. In that moment he felt Kayla, alive, strong, bound not just to the crown but to the land. The trees, the winds, the people. She was not hiding. She was preparing. And Virilia, the living soul of it, had already chosen her again. He tore the crown from his head, flinging it across the chamber. It clattered and rolled to a stop at the foot of the throne. Blood followed it. So did silence. He fell back, panting, hands trembling, vision swimming in red. Outside, a storm gathered, not of weather but of whispers. Of boots gathering in the hills. Of banners rising again. Kayla stood at the edge of the high ridge, her eyes fixed on the city of Virilia glittering faintly under a storm-heavy sky. The wind tugged at her hooded cloak, now embroidered subtly with the sigil of the forest, a rising flame crowned by leaves. She had not set foot in the capital since the day her blood stained the altar and her crown was stolen. But the land had not forgotten her. Neither had the people. She had returned not as a princess to reclaim what was taken but as something more, the bearer of flame, reborn in the woods that once whispered her name in grief. The forest spirits had tested her resolve, and she had emerged not just alive but awakened, her heartbeat now thrumming in tune with the very soul of Virilia. Her presence did not announce itself with armies or trumpets. She moved in the shadows, wearing silence like armor, and the city began to stir with quiet recognition. The alleys and marketplaces, though watched by Mehron's guards, buzzed with unease. The people whispered of cursed thorns, of a crown turning against its master, of a masked figure seen walking the riverbanks at night, leaving trails of warmth where frost should cling. Some said she walked barefoot through fire. Others swore her eyes glowed gold when she passed. But they all spoke of her with reverence. And fear. For where Kayla walked, candles relit themselves in windows long darkened. Where she lingered, small torches flared to life unbidden. In the poorest quarters, where Mehron's tax collectors dared not tread, Kayla found her kin, the forgotten, the hidden, the ones who had lost daughters, sons and homes to the coup. She moved from home to home, veiled but fearless, speaking not as royalty but as a sister wronged. She carried no blade, only a hollow wooden staff carved with sigils that glowed faintly under moonlight. Her voice was calm, but her words burned with purpose. The land remembers, she whispered, and the crown knows its mistress. From the ashes of old alliances rose a new force, the flame-bearers. Not warriors in armor, but candle-keepers, fire-dancers, smiths, and scribes whose ancestors had once vowed loyalty to Kayla's bloodline. Their weapons were symbols, simple torches hung from doorways, cloth strips dyed in deep crimson tied around wrists, and songs sung in ancient tongues beneath breath. These symbols began to appear across the city, at first quietly, then defiantly. Mehron's court was gripped with unrest. Rumors of Kayla's presence were dismissed, then feared, then investigated with fervor. Guards tore down homes, interrogated shopkeepers and raided temples, yet found no trace of her. Kayla remained a whisper, but one that echoed in every corner. When one of Mehron's nobles opened his estate gates to a group of forest healers and lit a flame in Kayla's symbol on his balcony, the king ordered his immediate execution. But the noble vanished, spirited away by allies hidden within the palace itself. It was clear then, the rebellion was not just coming. It had already begun. Kayla continued her work under the veil of night, aided by the loyal few who still remembered her kindness before the throne. The baker who once served her mother, the librarian who kept her childhood drawings, the mute stable boy she had once defended. These were her shield now. In a world where titles failed and magic betrayed, trust born of compassion endured. One night, as thunder rolled above the city, Kayla stood at the heart of the marketplace. Around her, cloaked figures, the flame-bearers, emerged silently from doorways, each holding a single torch. Together they lifted them high, forming a ring of flickering light around the old central fountain. A child stepped forward and placed a single flower upon the stone, the petals glowing faintly with enchanted fire. The flame danced, grew and pulsed outward, not burning but illuminating. Across Virilia, others answered. Torches lit on balconies. Candles reignited in temples. Lanterns swayed from rooftops. From the tower, Mehron saw it all and screamed into the night. Kayla did not flinch. She stepped forward, torch in hand, and whispered into the flame, "I am the fire you tried to bury." The light surged around her, casting her shadow high upon the old stone wall, not the shadow of a woman but of a crowned flame. Part Brofire. The temple held its breath. The flame pit around the pillar of balance shimmered with an eerie calm, as if even the fire waited to witness the final verdict. Mayron knelt, bloodied and breathless, the dark spiral mark seared into his armor still smoking. Kayla stood tall, her chest rising and falling slowly, her eyes closed in surrender to the will of something far greater than her. The crown hovered above the pillar, spinning slowly, humming with ancient magic. Its thorns no longer looked like decoration. They were alive, twitching, retracting, then extending like a beast in thought. The crowd of nobles, priests, and hidden loyalists watched in a silence so thick it pressed against their chests. Suddenly Mayron, with a surge of desperation, lunged upward. His arm shot out, fingers grasping for the crown midair. "It is mine," he roared, his voice ragged, teeth gritted. "By blood, by lineage, by—" He didn't finish. The crown halted in place, then struck. Without hesitation, it shot downward toward Mayron's outstretched hands. The thorns exploded outward, growing mid-flight into full spikes like twisted vines of iron. They impaled both of his hands, driving straight through his palms and into the stone beneath him with a force that cracked the marble floor. The sound echoed like a war drum, final and fatal. Mayron screamed, a raw, inhuman sound that pierced the temple halls. He fell to his knees again, this time not from ritual or pride, but pure agony. Blood pooled rapidly beneath him, dark and thick, steaming where it met the remnants of sacred flame. He tried to pull away, but the crown held him there, pinned like a butterfly under glass, forced to face judgment. Then the crown slowly lifted again. The vines retracted from Mayron's hands, pulling away with an audible tear of flesh. He collapsed, twitching but alive, barely. The crown rose higher and turned as if scanning the room. The thorns began to soften. Their black iron hue melted into gold, and the sharpness dulled into elegant, twisting vines, each forming ancient symbols of wisdom, strength, and truth. Kayla, unmoving, exhaled. A whisper of wind encircled her. Her cloak lifted slightly, and the flames nearest to her bowed inward. The crown spun once more, then descended. Not quickly, not dramatically, but gently, as if the weight of destiny itself knew it must move with care. It hovered just above Kayla's brow. The golden vines shimmered in anticipation. The moment stretched into eternity. And then, it settled. The instant the crown touched her, a light burst from the point of contact. It was not flame, but pure brilliance, white gold and overwhelming. The temple lit up as if the sun itself had entered its walls. The ground trembled, not in fear but in acknowledgement. Statues cracked, not from violence but from the shedding of old lies. Windows glowed. Outside, the bells that had long stood silent began to ring themselves. No hand touched them. The crowd gasped. Some fell to their knees. Others wept. Even those who had sided with Mayron covered their faces, unsure whether to fear or worship what they witnessed. And Mayron, he screamed again. Not from the pain in his hands but from something else. He clutched his face, writhing. The crown, in choosing Kayla, had cast him aside utterly and finally. And in doing so, it had taken from him what he cherished most, his sight. The light that crowned Kayla had blinded him. "No," he shrieked, clawing at the air. "I see nothing. I see darkness." But no one moved to help him. His own guards, once loyal through fear, now backed away in horror. His shadow seemed to shrink, swallowed by the radiance of the true queen. Kayla opened her eyes. They glowed, not with magic but with something deeper. The wisdom of Virelia's line. The fire of her trials. The strength of a queen who had bled and survived. She looked down at Mayron and her voice was steady, not cruel. "You saw the throne as a weapon. You used the people as pawns. You tried to take by force what only spirit could earn." He sobbed, hands dripping red, face lifted blindly toward her voice. "Mercy, please?" Kayla walked past him, not even sparing a glance. Her silence was louder than any decree. From the back of the temple, the great doors opened without touch. A breeze rushed in, filled with forest air and the scent of rain. The world was waking, responding to the return of its rightful ruler. Outside, the people had gathered. In alleyways, on rooftops, in the streets. And when Kayla stepped out, the crown now glowing like fire-forged gold, they fell silent. Then came the first whisper, "The queen." It spread. Louder. Stronger. "The queen. The crown has chosen. The thorns are gone." Kayla raised her hand, not to command but to bless. The bells rang louder. And Virilia, for the first time in years, breathed in peace. Artibro? The sun hung low over Virilia's capital, casting a soft amber glow upon the temple spires. A hush swept through the crowd gathered in the grand square. Nobles, commoners, priests, soldiers and children stood side by side, their eyes fixed on the steps of the temple. There, amidst crimson banners and golden flame-bearer torches, stood Kayla. No longer a fugitive, no longer a girl hidden in shadows, but a queen, crowned not by decree or tradition, but by the will of the crown itself. The crown upon her head gleamed with warmth and quiet majesty. Though transformed, it still bore the faintest etching of its thorns, fine subtle lines woven into the golden vines like scars beneath beauty. A reminder that power, once misused, would draw blood again. A symbol of judgment earned, not stolen. A chorus of ancient chants rose around her, led by the High Flame Keeper. His voice trembled as he spoke the words no one had heard in decades. By the fire of the ancestors, by the breath of the first flame, the crown has chosen. Let all kneel before Kayla of Virilia, queen by light, queen by justice. The people knelt. The entire square seemed to exhale, as if releasing years of unrest, corruption, and fear. Kayla stood still for a moment, the weight of the moment pressing down like a mountain. And then, slowly she raised her hand, not in conquest but in unity. I will not rule above you, she spoke, her voice echoing through the temple steps and across stone and flame. I will stand with you. I have walked the shadows. I have bled. I have lost. But I have also listened. Virilia does not need a throne of gold. It needs roots deep in truth. A silence followed. Then cheers erupted like a wave. The people called her name. Kayla. Queen Kayla. The chants rolled like thunder. Yet amidst the triumph, a quiet justice unfolded. Far from the temple, through the alleyways guarded by loyal flame-bearers, Mayron stumbled. His hands, now wrapped in blood-soaked linen, trembled as he walked. No chains bound him. No sword was drawn against his back. His punishment was not to die but to live, with his hands that would never stop bleeding, and with the memories that would never stop haunting him. He passed by those who once served him. No one offered help. Some looked away. Others spat. One child, no older than 7, threw a wilted flower at his feet and said, "You made the light go out." But she brought it back. Mayron said nothing. His eyes, useless since the trial, remained open, staring into a blackness that now mirrored his hollow ambition. Kayla had not ordered his death. She had not imprisoned him in a tower. No public display of punishment was needed. He had been given something far crueler, the crown's truth, carved into his very flesh. Back within the palace, Kayla moved through the halls she once wandered as a child. But everything felt new. Her footsteps echoed with a queen's purpose. She paused before a mural in the eastern wing, a painting once defaced during Mayron's coup. With a sweep of her hand, she traced the ancestral symbols burned into the marble beneath. They glowed faintly under her touch. She turned to her advisors, many of them once divided, now united by the crown's decision. The palace must remain open to the people. This place belongs to Virilia, not to vanity. Word by word, Kayla began reshaping the kingdom. Decrees were passed, not from isolation, but through counsel with those who had suffered the most. The families of the fallen were honored. The flame-bearers, once whispered of in secret, were appointed as guardians of justice and truth. And above the throne, where banners once bore Mayron's crest, now hung a single emblem, an image of the crown with one golden vine and one faint thorn. A balance of grace and warning. On the night of her final coronation rite, Kayla stood on the highest balcony of the palace. The stars blinked into the velvet sky. Below, bonfires burned in celebration. Drums and songs filled the air. She held the crown in her hands once more before placing it back on her brow. Its warmth was familiar now, not heavy, not burning. It hummed gently like an old friend returning home. She closed her eyes and whispered, not to the crowd but to herself. To wear this is to remember. And she did. She remembered the cold forest floor. The trial by fire. The crown tearing through Mayron's hands. The whispers of the flame spirits. The quiet courage of loyalists who risked everything. She remembered it all. And it made her reign not one of vengeance, but of vision. Thus, Virilia entered a new era, not of conquest but of healing. Where once thrones had meant control, now they stood for service. And in every corner of the realm, when children asked why the crown bore thorns beneath its gold, elders would say, "So that no hand may ever again wear it in greed." One bro.